This podcast is a member of the Place to Be Nation family. Visit us at placetobenation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
All right, hello once again, Lucha Lushes. This is Timothy, Robert Buckner, flying solo again for another episode of Get to Know PTBN PWO. This is a PWP edition. Officially, I guess the first one, but not really, because I talked about it, but it never got released. The one lost episode that we've ever had was going to be the first Pro Wrestling Ponderings interview on the show, and that was with Carrie Awful, but that was the unfortunate recording disappeared episode. So that was with Carrie Awful and special guest co-host on that episode of Hugh Little. That was a real banger, and I just recently got to meet Carrie Awful in person for the first time, so that was nice. But tonight we got what should really be the first PWP interview as far as I'm concerned, especially with the way I like to do things, because I like to start it out with go to the top first and start with the big boss, and I think you probably are the big boss of PWP as far as I can tell, because I'm joined tonight by Chris GST, I guess. Is that kind of how people know you? What's the official name?
That is very much how people know me. Chris GST is the name that works.
Okay.
Because the last name is far too long.
Got it. So, Chris, am I right in saying that you're the big boss of PWP right now?
Yeah, I am kind of the de facto senior editor since Jerome Cuson stepped down about a year or so ago.
Okay, and speaking of Jerome, this is just a stupid anecdote, and we're going to get into stuff, and I mean, I'll just out myself for going on XWT, which I think everybody who's listening to this knows what that is probably, and if you don't, it's one of the many secret torrent sites to watch illegal torrents of wrestling videos and stuff that you decide not to pay for because you're a terrible person. And a while ago, I saw a torrent that got posted, and then in the comments, there was a user who had the name Jerome Cuson, who left a comment saying, "Oh, good, I can steal this and put it on my blog now." And I always thought there's no way that that's the real Jerome. Like, that's someone who's, like, trolling, making fun of him. You know what I mean? And I always thought that was such a weird thing. So when I hear people talk about Jerome, I always remember that person who, like, why would you take the time to make an account and do something weird like that, where you're, like, kind of playing this character of, like, trying to be a jerk about someone who, you know what I mean, who's just, like, trying to do wrestling coverage and stuff. But that's
Sure.
That's always
sure. But yeah, no, I would assume 100% that is a troller. Jerome is not that type of person.
Yeah, I'm always like, that's such a weird thing to see, you know, like, no, I don't think anyone would do that. And number one, and number two, like, who puts their full name as their username on a website like that? You know what I mean? That's just a very obvious troll there. So Chris, the first question I'm supposed to ask in every episode is, are you now, or have you ever been a member of the PWO board?
I know, but I do know of it.
Okay. You, I know you're involved with obviously with PWP, but before PWP, what was your kind of stomping grounds when it came to talking about wrestling online or looking up results and stuff about wrestling online?
So I go as far back as at one point I was on WrestlingFigs.com. It's the action figure message board. I believe that's still around. And I was also on WrestlingForum.com, I want to say. Yeah, WrestlingForum.com or .org, something like that. And I started the Ring of Honor Live Journal community, which at one point was, but this is back when Gabe and the original owners of Ring of Honor had it. I was actually listed on their website as a community. So that's pretty much where my wrestling online fandom began.
Okay, and then from there, I guess, how long were you kind of just... Well, I guess you saying that you were like a big part of the ROH Live Journal pretty early on. So from the beginning,
that was like back in 2002.
Okay, and so like from the beginning, you were into kind of being more, I don't know how to say it, more involved. You weren't like one of these passive people on the online communities. You were like trying to be pretty out there, because I would assume then from there you start the website. I mean, kind of what was the impetus for starting PWP, and just kind of the genesis of the website in general?
Sure. So part of the live journal community was mainly because I liked having a one-stop shop to find out ROH news, and since I was the one reading so much of it, I decided, hey, let's just put it all in one place for people to come find it. Then around 2007 or 8, Kevin Ford, who was also on the Wrestling Figs forum, was writing for a blog, and it was this off-brand sports website. I don't remember what it was called. And he and Jerome were already writing for it, and they saw that I covered Ring of Honor a lot. So they asked me, during the HD Net days, say, hey, would you like to review Ring of Honor for us? And that kind of began our friendship. We had, on a forum, we'd spoken to each other before, but we never really conversed about it in detail up until that point. And then when that blog went down, we decided to start our own website, and the portion of the blog that we had was already called Pro Wrestling Ponderings. I believe Jerome was actually the one that entitled it that way, so we just kind of went along with that since it was already kind of known as Pro Wrestling Ponderings. And so the website officially became its own thing 2009. Okay. And that's how we started. And
so with something like that, obviously it sounds like it grew out of something that already existed. But is there like almost a credo or an ethos to the culture of the site from the beginning, or being something that just kind of organically grew? Did it just happen?
No. So Jerome he got his bachelor's degree in journalism and he got his master's degree in English. So the credo behind the website was always a sort of bringing a little bit more journalistic and journalism and integrity to covering pro wrestling. There have been a lot of, hey, there's a lot of websites out there. There's a lot of copy and paste websites out there, and there's a lot of wrestling fans who, for whatever reason, there's no other way to say it, but just like to make stuff up just to be that for clickbait or whatever purpose they get out of it. And we didn't want to be that. And the covering of indie wrestling to us was, we go back as far as Jerome or Kevin, who live on the East Coast, texting me results for me to then tweet or put on the website, because at that point, using a website online on your mobile was not the most convenient thing in the world. And we always enjoyed being the website that just kind of offered up, this is independent pro wrestling at its base, and with as little bias as possible. And that has kind of progressed and is still, to me, very much the spirit of PWP today that I try to uphold, just because of Jerome's background.
It's interesting that you mention that, especially right now with Jerome's background being, actually in journalism, with the conversations that are going on about wrestling journalism, right? And even, Ryan Satin having it in quotation marks for his banner. And then we have, wrestlers coming out directly questioning the concept that there is no such thing as wrestling journalism. And there should be journalistic ethics and standards held to something that's trying to purport itself as journalism. And you talk about trying to hold it to that standard more.
And the funny thing is that we never claim to be wrestling journalists. We have always put out there we are not, but we like to have the kind of uphold certain ethical standards to it, because there have been many times where we could have put out a story or put out an article that would either be considered clickbait or flashy, and I would go to Jerome and he would just say, no, you're not putting that out there, even though it may be really intriguing, it may be interesting. That is just not the website we're creating. You can leave that to other websites. And we're not trying to say that any of that is quote unquote bad or wrong, but it's just not the website that we wanted to have.
Well, I mean,
yeah, it is definitely an interesting conversation when it comes to, well, what is wrestling journalism? It's intriguing.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you, I mean, you said that you guys choose to not refer to what you do in that way, and I mean, I completely understand that. I think there is some like expectation of what you're producing for it to be considered journalism, right? And if you're doing more opinion and kind of reviews or whatever like that, it's not necessarily journalism, but
exactly. And that's why we don't call it that, because we are providing results, news, reviews, some opinion-based articles, but these are not professionals, and we don't want to put it out there as if we are, to give because to me that is just being dishonest with your readership and your listenership, and we never wanted to do that.
Well, so then do you think that there can be wrestling journalism? Like, can it exist, and do you think it does exist? Do you have any examples?
Yeah, I absolutely do believe that exists. I think that, so I always have what I call the big four of wrestling, and if you want to say wrestling analysis, news, and journalism, for me it would be the Observer, the Torch, ProWrestling.net, and PW Insider. And while I am not saying that they always purport themselves 100% in a quote-unquote journalistic way, I do subscribe to them more than others. I mean, even I think there are other really good websites out there, like some of the articles on Voices of Wrestling, the Tag Rope magazines, I think are really great. And there's a few others that really do try to uphold a sort of journalistic standard, but do we sometimes fall short? Of course, because we're human beings. But I definitely think that there could be, and if someone, I mean, to me, I would have to say either Wade Keller at the Torch or Dave Meltzer at the Observer. And again, they're not perfect by any means. They definitely, there are critiques of both, but I think they spend the most time trying to be as close to that as possible.
Yeah, and I mean, for me personally, and this is just me, I think the Torch is probably the closest thing to what you would say, like a almost a professional journalistic organization covering wrestling that exists. And even them, they do have a lot of, I guess, opinion and analysis pieces, but I mean, I think that stuff goes hand in hand. I mean, who's to say like an op-ed is not journalism when it's informed?
Oh, right. Yeah.
You know?
Right. No, yeah, I'm definitely not saying that it, and that's why we don't say that we're journalists also. That's another portion of that, is because I mean, I went to wrestling training for about a week and a half, but I've never been quote unquote in the business, and neither have any of us, except, Kevin Ford does commentary for Nova Pro. Jerome has done some commentary stuff in the background, but at that point, it's saying we have that knowledge, but we really don't. We don't have the institutional knowledge of actually being in the business. And again, that is not to say that degrades our opinion, but I would also posit that, well, then I'm not going to say that this is journalism. So
I mean, that's an interesting thing too, because I almost feel like that argument about like having to be more involved in the business to have your opinion be taken seriously is almost.
Oh yeah, and that argument is fakakta. It's completely false. It's a false narrative, because anyone that says that, I'll posit them. Okay, well, did you have an opinion on a movie? Oh yeah, of course I did. Have you ever been an actor? No. Oh, well then your opinion means nothing. And then they go, well, wait a minute. I watch a lot of movies, and I go, well, I watch a lot of wrestling, and I talk to a lot of bookers, and I talk to a lot of wrestlers. So if you're going to say that my opinion doesn't matter and I shouldn't even be able to express it, well, then maybe you should stop expressing your thoughts about movies or politics or anything that you've never been involved with. Yeah. So, I agree with you. It's that argument when I hear promoters or wrestlers say that, I just go, well, you're a child. And you really don't have enough worldly experience to realize that everyone has an opinion. There is definitely a gradient to how much wisdom is behind those opinions, for sure. And that is not to say that I know more about wrestling than someone who's actually in it, but I have been involved with it long enough I mean, anyone who is on in a presidential cabinet, have they ever served on that type of level before? Probably not. But they now are, and you hope that the wisdom that comes with that will guide them in the correct direction. And so I feel like it's the same way for anyone who decides to cover this. Now, at the same time, hey, there are a lot of websites and podcasts out there where the guys, they have their opinions, and as long as they don't go, well, these are, this is quote unquote. I don't want to say the term educated because that's too strong of a term, but if they express like, hey, this is just our opinions, and we know that everything is subjective, then great. But if there are definitely some podcasts who have I've listened to, and they try to pretend that they know something more so than. No, I'm not saying like a wrestler's only been in it for a cup of coffee, but when they start telling other wrestlers like, "Hey, this is how it's supposed to be," it's like, well, I'm sure every locker room has its different nuances, and so at that point, I would get annoyed, and that's what we try to not do at PWP. We try to not pretend that we quote unquote know how this is supposed to work. Um, and again, that's why we don't ever go, oh, this is the journalism for independent wrestling. It's like, well, we're a blog and we cover news and analysis, but we're not going to pretend that we're quote unquote experts.
At what level do you think, like, because you talk about the big four and you mentioned Voices of Wrestling, like, is there a level that you think you have to be professional to be able to, like, say, like, the quote-unquote journalism tag? Or
to me, yes. For me personally, yes. I don't prescribe to people saying that, well, you can never get to that level. Now, I mean, and also I think to a degree that it's in a way sort of an ego thing. There are several writers for news outlets out there that I listen to and subscribe to, and they've been writing since before I was even born, and they will still, when they put stuff out there on Twitter, will say, well, just so you know, I'm not a journalist. I've just been giving my opinion for many, many years, and they genuinely mean that. So I don't know what level that would be. I personally would think that someone like Jerome, who I admire greatly, that he went to school for it. I'm not saying you have to go to school for it, but I would hope that there was some level of education that you went through before you start saying, well, I'm a professional at this. Because technically, if you're a professional, if you get paid to do it, well, then that means I'm a professional blogger, because in some ways I make money from the website. But that's, I think, to some degree, I think it's just subjective. It's open ended, and I don't try to put a limitation on that.
Okay.
So, yeah. So one of the people that I listen to a lot is Todd Martin, who wrote for The Observer. He's now at The Torch. He writes for the LA Times. And even though he's done that for a while, I wouldn't say he's a quote-unquote journalist, whereas I would say someone like Ariel Helwani is most definitely a journalist. So.
Okay. Do you think that there's some level of intent that makes it, like, you could take it at that level, or do you think it really comes down to just what you're actually producing?
I don't think it's necessarily that's kind of a hard question to answer, because it is there's definitely the content. You have to have the content side, but just because you produce content does not make you a journalist.
Right.
Unfortunately or unfortunately, in 2018, anyone with a cell phone and internet connection can vlog or blog or whatever, and whether they do it consciously with journalistic integrity intact, great. But if they don't and they're just doing it, well, then no, I'm not going to call you a journalist, no matter how long you've done it. Okay. I think it's the quality of the content that would make a person a journalist. Okay. But again, that's just my opinion on it.
Right. Okay. Well, yeah, that's just an interesting conversation to be had, obviously, because it's always a hot button, but I think it's especially a hot button right now with people openly trying to call out people about.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And for me, I always find that to be kind of I find it to be interesting that when people do that, because I for sure have been called up by readers or people on the internet or wrestlers and saying, well, you said you're a journalist. I'm like, well, no, I didn't. And that may sound like I'm splitting hairs, but there's also the intent, the motivations for what I do. That is not to say that I just assume that I am a journalist and that I am going to pretend that when I report something that I am trying to portray myself as an expert or as I guess at a certain level that should be taken higher than another level that you would have an expectation for. And so I find when people bring that up, I just kind of go, okay, well, that's not at all what we meant to do. And if you interpret it that way, I'm sorry if you felt that, that you were fooled, but that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to report on stuff as honestly and without bias as possible. And is that something that's always possible? No, because everyone has bias in every single way. And I think anyone who tries to deny that, they're just fooling themselves.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely agree with you about that. I guess it's just try to take yourself out of those biases and like you do, just try to like take yourself out of the kind of that realm anyways, and just openly say like, this is my opinion, which I think you do a good job of on the podcast, the PWP podcast, of like being pretty straightforward about stuff, being like, this is my opinion, this is how I feel about this. But transitioning over to that, the podcast itself, to me, and I hate, it's a weird thing to say directly to you, but to me, I like the show and I listen, but I don't always listen to everything, and I don't always regularly listen because I find it difficult with you guys giving results so freely on there that sometimes I want to protect myself from being spoiled from stuff that I know I'm going to watch.
For sure. Yeah, we've tried to, we've slowly changed over the years. But yeah, and in this culture of the spoiler culture, yeah, it's definitely hard. And you try to make that balance of, well, what are we trying? So for example, if it's TV tapings, like for Ring of Honor or Lucha Underground, we save that till the very end, and we give people warning like, hey, you're not going to know spoilers for this on TV. You're not going to know. So, if you don't want to listen to it, you don't have to at all. It came from the context and culture of growing up, like I said, in 2002, the early aughts. The only way for people to put results out there was to have someone text them or someone there live at the show, and of course, people wanted to read that. Now, I'm still in that mindset. I just don't consider results spoilers, because how else are you going to know what happened at the show? And unless you're a person that, hey, I am buying every DVD from a promotion, which, back then, yeah, that's what I was doing. I own every Ring of Honor DVD up to 2010. Every single one, including compilations, HDNet, all that stuff. But did I want to know results of the show beforehand? Yeah, because I followed the storylines that way, and that would make me more excited about buying the DVD. Nowadays, in today's culture of, I don't want anything to be spoiled. Okay, that's fine. But that, to me, that doesn't mean that every result is a spoiler, if that makes sense. Like the Olympics going on, if you're watching it live, someone should have full right to be able to say, well, I'm watching this live and it just happened, so that's it. Someone should not be able to say, oh, you're spoiling it for the rest of us. It's like, well, how did you not know that when people are watching an event happen live in front of them, they're going to talk about, how did you not know that was going to happen? Now, to me, that's different than a movie, for example. A movie, for me, yes, you can definitely spoil a movie, and that's unfortunate. And, should we find a better way to talk about them? Maybe. But I view that differently than I do a live event, and I view that differently from the way I view television. Because say someone has more time than me, and they can watch a television show live. Like Raw, for example. People can watch Raw live, and they tweet about it. I'm not going to go to all of them and be like, hey, guys, you're spoiling this for me because I can't watch Raw until later. Like, to me, that's a little... It's imposing an inconvenience inconvenience upon the rest of the viewing audience that I just don't believe should happen. So, but I appreciate it that you, if you are so involved into a product, you don't want to even know the results of a show before the DVD or the MP4 comes out. And yeah, it's a hard balance to try to decide what is appropriate for reporting that or not.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think if you've listened to recent episodes, we've kind of gotten away from that, or you know what I mean. We don't give a lot out.
Right. Yeah, I've noticed that there's a difference, and I do definitely see how it harkens kind of back to an older time of wrestling kind of coverage, where on boards the results would just be getting posted. I mean, I remember before I moved to Los Angeles, because I grew up here in Southern California, but I originally lived like in Palm Springs, Coachella Valley, like where Coachella Fest is and stuff. And I didn't go to PWG shows, so I would be on the board, the PWG board, you know, clicking to get the results, refresh to see the results as soon as they're getting posted. But then once it's like I'm out here and I'm going to the shows, yeah, I couldn't imagine like trying to get the results off the board. And then it does feel, now that so much stuff makes tape, and usually the turnaround time is so much quicker, that it does turn into like a little bit, for me, this is me personally, because I'm very involved in, you know, watching wrestling and talking about so much stuff everywhere, and wanting to at least kind of see the stuff without having it like really fresh in my brain about who's definitely going to win every match, you know. So results are kind of not a turn off, but they're just like, I try to steer clear of them a little bit. But I definitely get, like you said, like it comes across like,
for sure,
a little bit like not a bygone era, but just like the old school kind of coverage.
You know what? I would say that it is. I would say that it is. It's a bygone era of wrestling culture where that was how results were put out there. Nowadays, like you said, a quick turnaround on DVDs now. I mean, Chikara, for example, with the King of Cheers, and I don't remember what year it was, but they basically got them out within 24 hours of the last day, and that was just insane. So at that point, yeah, why read spoilers if you're able to watch it so quickly?
Right.
And I completely understand. So if it's something, but I guess for me, I'm just still in that mindset, and maybe one day I'll get out of it. But I also hope that people know that, hey, there are spoilers, such as for Ring of Honor TV that's going to appear in the future, or Lucha Underground TV that's going to appear in the future. But if the Ring of Honor episode has already passed, that's not a spoiler.
Right.
But you know what? I'm sure you've seen it. We actually do get those. When Rich Lacconi posts his review of a show that he gets to watch on TV on Saturday, but they don't get to see it until, for whatever reason, because it's not on their market, until Sunday, or even they watch it, I guess, on Wednesday on TV on delay. There have been people saying, "Hey, why are you spoiling the show for us?" And I really just can't get. I don't understand.
Yeah, and I'm not like super sensitive about it. Like I said, it's just I just prefer to skip over the results, because a lot of this stuff I'm like, well, I'm gonna watch this now. You know, sometimes when you're giving results and it's for like some random IWA show that I'm never gonna watch, then I don't care. I'll listen to it, you know. But when it's companies that I know I'm going to watch that show, I might skip. But I guess it's funny because we kind of diverged into so much talking about spoiler culture and everything. My original question was going to be, and in some ways you kind of answered it, but maybe I want to get you to put like a finer point on it. Who do you envision is the listener that wants that, or the listener, who is your listener that's like, following that way? Yeah. Because for me, that's always been my question, is I feel like the show is targeted to someone like myself, and someone like myself is going to watch this stuff, so I don't want to hear the results. But like in your head, who do you see that fan being of your podcast that wants to hear the results given out that way?
To us, our listeners are people who clearly are very much into independent wrestling, but don't have time to watch everything. So, for example, we put only results out there for a specific number of promotions, only because, hey, there's only so much time in the day, for one. And so I imagine a listener of Ring of Honor, and they go, oh, well, I watch Ring of Honor religiously, so maybe I don't want to hear those results. But this AAW promotion, that sounds fascinating. I don't have time or the resources to watch every show. But if you hear the results and there are particular talents that you want to keep an eye on, and you go, oh, hey, that match result sounded really intriguing. I want to see what happened. Because to me, wrestling is a visual art. It is not necessarily about the quote unquote result, if that makes sense. The result is important because that's the culmination of storytelling. But if you just know the result, but you don't know the action that occurred in the ring, I want to say that it shouldn't entirely be ruined for you. If that makes sense. Like if I tell someone, hey, Black Panther is a really good movie, does that mean that I spoiled it for you? That you go, oh well, now I don't even need to go see it because I know that's a good movie.
Or the other side. I mean, I've had people who've complained about stuff like that because they say like, I know it's a good movie, but like saying like, now you've built me up, and if it's not really good, then I'm gonna be let down.
Sure.
You know? So,
yeah, for sure. No, and I can understand that for sure. It's how things are framed. So, but to me, again, that to our listeners, we try to balance between the hardcore inside, read everything, know a lot about what's going on in indie wrestling, but also the casual indie wrestling fan who maybe only watches their local promotion, but would like to learn more about the others, and which other ones are, to a degree, as good as the ones that they are intrigued in. And it is, to me, that's our listener. It's the guy in Florida or in Philadelphia who, for whatever reason, may not be able to watch all the PWG shows, but he wants to know results. And so, okay, we'll name off the major results for you so you can kind of follow. For me, it's also kind of, when I used to read the aftermags, I would read the results in the back of promotions I was never going to be able to see and never going to fly out to go watch. But just being able to read those results kind of allowed me to follow certain storylines, just by who won and who lost.
Yeah, no.
And it captured my imagination. So to me, that is kind of who we podcast for. And there's a balance there somewhere. I'm sure we'll perfect it as much as we can. And we'll see. But that's who we do the podcast for.
Yeah, because I know that Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just kidding. And sometimes, honestly, we just do it for ourselves because Dylan and Rich and I just like to talk. So,
Yeah, I mean, I can't blame you. And sometimes maybe if you're just reading results, it'll give you a reprieve from hearing Dylan's voice constantly going. But I'm just gently ribbing Dylan there. But yeah, I think I find myself kind of going from like, just like completely questioning and not understanding it to, like I said, like being pretty much fine with it. But I think you actually framing it that way, I get it a little bit better. And when you talk about like kind of the, I guess, delineation to the aftermags, it does kind of remind me of a different time, which is kind of nice. So I hope you guys do keep it up now, even though I was maybe not 100% pro the reading of the results on the podcast. I think you convinced me there, and I definitely think that
as cultures change, though, also, so say it becomes a thing where our listeners tell us, hey, we'd like for you to go down the other. So we've changed the format of now we talk about more the broader stories or more newsworthy items that are happening in indie wrestling rather than just focusing on the storylines and the results of every show that we put up on the website, just because also that is something that we heard. And at some point, maybe we won't give results at all on the newscast. When I started it years ago with Des Delgadillo, it was because, hey, because I listened to, this is going to sound a little weird, but I think listeners who listen to me on the newscast know I don't watch any WWE product, like none of it, not Raw, SmackDown, NXT, as terrible as that probably sounds, 205 Live. I can't even tell you the last time I watched a WWE pay-per-view in full or even at all. I'll see clips, and if it's intriguing enough for me to look at, I'll look, but I just don't have time for that. But I still listen to Wade Keller and Todd Martin and Brian Alvarez and Dave Meltzer talk about the shows, because while they talk about it, I'm at least still informed of what is going on. And to me, that is kind of, I hope, what our podcast will do for indie wrestling fans, that while they may not have time to watch the product, they can still keep up on storylines that occurred, so that when they see their friends talking about it, they can go, oh, hey, yeah, I heard about that. And then maybe if it's intriguing enough, hey, they'll buy a DVD or an MP4 because they really wanted to see it.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I think that the newscast that you guys do is probably the most accessible kind of indie podcast. So, like, saying that it's for a casual, hardcore fan, as I'll give a little nod to Sam from We Don't Know Wrestling on his terminology there. I think probably the best podcast for like a casual, hardcore fan who follows primarily the indies and New Japan, but doesn't follow it super religiously. I think your guys' show does a really good job of covering that. And I will say that the new kind of trio that you have going full time is you guys have a lot of really good chemistry with each other. And I appreciate
that. Yeah, I wish we could record the banter we do off air or when we're not recording. Because I swear it is just so much more intriguing and fun. But at the same time, we'd probably get into tons of trouble with people. So.
Yeah, and you can't catch that lightning in a bottle sometimes, you know? It's just... I can't remember... I think Joe Lanza tried to do like a unfiltered podcast where he just talks about stuff other than wrestling.
I remember that.
And it's just not the... It's not the same.
Yeah, somehow it wasn't the same, even though it was still, in a way, entertaining, because it was still Joe Lanza, who's entertaining as all get up. But something was off, even though it was quote-unquote unfiltered, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's like the off-the-cuff stuff that you're saying in the context of a wrestling podcast is a lot different than when you're then trying to be like, this is just a, I guess, shock jock comedy kind of thing. It's just two different worlds, so it doesn't always work out that way. I guess we should probably take a break. We'll come back and maybe get into some real life stuff outside of just this wrestling stuff, which is taking up a huge chunk of this conversation now. And then, I guess that'll be it.
Additional consideration paid for by the following.
Hey, pro wrestling announcer Kevin Kelly here. I want to make sure you are all subscribed to all the great feeds here at Place to Be Nation. It's really easy to do. Just head to iTunes or your preferred podcatcher app today and search and subscribe to the Place to Be Nation wrestling feed, which, of course, includes the full archives of the Kevin Kelly Show, the Place to Be Nation pod feed, and the Pro Wrestling Only feed. Subscribe, listen, and then rate us and leave feedback today. And be sure to give Justin your true thoughts. I mean, don't hold back. After all, he is kind of a jerk. Just listen to Scott.
Place to Be Nation's JT Rosero and Chad Campbell here. We want to let you know that we have a ton of great podcasts available to you on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and PlaceToBeNation.com, and we offer those to you on 3 great feeds. On the Place to Be Nation wrestling feed, we bring you the Mothership, the original Place to Be podcast, as well as Main Event, Lucha Afterground, and our monthly pay-per-view reaction shows, as well as the Our Vantage Point podcast and Jeff Learns Wrestling. In addition to these full-length shows, we also deliver quick-hit pod blasts on topics old and new.
Over on the Pro Wrestling Only feed, we dive deep inside the wrestling business with a stacked army of experts leading the way. The feed features potpourri shows such as This Week in Wrestling, Greetings from Allentown, Psychology is Dead, Puro Potpourri, Stacy and Elliot's Bogus Journey, and the Military Industrial Suplex. We also have shows that focus intently on certain topics like Letters from Center Stage, Space City, and NWA Classics on Demand Adventure, Through the Years, Strong Style History, Strong Style Story, and Mount Olympus. Plus, the feed has the full archives of legendary shows like Titans of Wrestling, Where the Big Boys Play, Letters from Kayfabe, and much more. And on our popular Place to Be Nation Pop podcast feed, we offer such great shows as the Glenn Butler Podcast Hour Spectacular, Rank and File, PTBN Dadcast, Go Home in a Box, NBA Team, and Lucha Undead, as well as a veritable podcast heaven for comics fans with the Hard Traveling Fanboys, Sellers Points, Todd Weber's Conversation, Geek and Sassy, and Imaginary Stories podcasts.
You can find all of these current shows plus archives of our past podcasts, including The Kevin Kelly Show, as well by subscribing to all of our feeds on iTunes. And while there, be sure to rate and leave feedback as well. All of these shows, plus others, available on PlacementNation.com, where we cover pro wrestling, sports, movies, comics, plus in-depth stretch projects and more. Be sure to support our site by using PlacementNation.com/Amazon when shopping online, and download our free PTB Vintage Vault Refresh ebooks via the links on our site. We also want to thank our friends at Bonehead's Wing Bar in West Warwick, Rhode Island, and Fall River, Massachusetts, TheHistoryOfWrestling.com, and Scott Keats' blog of Doom. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr as well. PlacementNation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
All right, Chris. Well, we're back, and I guess I want to get into real life stuff now. You said you're a California boy, born and raised. I know you're in NorCal, which is kind of on enemy territory for us here in Southern California. I know that there's a little bit of a feud there in Northern California, but is that where you were kind of born and raised, as you said, in California? Are you a NorCal guy through and through?
Yes, I was raised in Monterey, California, and I mean NorCal has always been my home. So now I'm in Sacramento. I actually lived in Hermosa Beach for a little while.
Oh, nice.
But NorCal is always what I rep. But that does not necessarily mean that I am not the biggest Golden State Warriors fan. For as sacrilegious as that sounds,
oh,
I'm like,
geez.
Okay. I know, right? And now everyone listening to this just suddenly turned off the show.
Yeah, you're in trouble, buddy. That's
you're not a Steph Curry guy? Oh.
So I mentioned the feud. Now I've always made the assertion that like the kind of animosity between Northern California and Southern California is like pretty one-sided. And I don't know if you agree with that, but to me, everyone I know here in Southern California pretty much thinks that Northern California is pretty cool. And then a lot of people that I know from Northern California kind of like look down on us down here. Do you think that that's a fair assessment, or do you think that maybe I'm just being a little bit defensive?
I think when I was a kid, that could have been, I could see that as being true in terms of perception. Nowadays, so I just went down to a convention in San Diego this past weekend, and all of us had a ton of fun. And we're all from Sacramento, and we enjoyed the hell out of it. So I would say now maybe it's a little different, but back then, it is, and that's just cultural, that's just history. I mean, all the significant events that have happened in Los Angeles and in the greater area, that's just kind of, it is a very different culture than the Bay Area. So, while I don't want to say people look down on them, I think they want to say to a degree, well, it's different. And hey, it's the same perception I get when I leave California. I have gotten in so many other states that when I go and walk into a coffee shop and go, they can instantly hear my accent and they go, oh, you're just a crazy Californian. I've heard that so many times. And I just go, okay. I mean, I don't think we're that crazy, but I get why you're saying that.
Yeah, no. I guess that is true that maybe it's similar. I personally love the Bay. I go up there pretty regularly. Actually, some of my closest friends live in like Oakland, San Francisco, stuff like that. And I'm also, the other side of this podcast too, I guess you may or may not know, is like beer. We do some beer reviews and stuff like that as well with my buddy Adrian, who actually lives in Colorado, which is another huge kind of beer city. He lives in Denver. It's a beer state, but specifically Denver is a huge beer city. And so I love San Francisco for like the beer scene as well. So yeah, I love it up there, but what do you kind of get into up there in Northern California? And just overall, like, do you have any regional specific kind of hobbies or dalliances that you get into?
Yeah, so Monterey, growing up there, I surf. I'm not saying that people in SoCal don't surf, because you definitely do, but I feel like it is a California thing. So yeah, I surf. But other than that, I wouldn't say there's anything that I specifically do that's specifically NorCal.
Right. Which, surfing is a big thing in California for sure. Do you still get into it now?
In Sacramento, it's a little bit harder to do. The beach is a little further away, about an hour and 45 minutes. But yeah, I still get into it.
It's so funny to say stuff like that because, yeah, like I have friends in, Colorado, friends in Texas, stuff like that. And when you say like the beach is, under 2 hours away, so it's hard to get out there, I bet they think that it's just a shock, because Because for
Oh,
them,
yeah.
it's like to get to the beach, how long would it take, you know?
I worked on the wharf in Monterey when I was a kid, and this big, tourist bus came up, and I'm watching all the people get off of it, and they come into the shop, and this nice elderly woman came up to me, and I'm standing behind the register, and she says, "Hey, can you tell me what lake that is?" And I turned around, looked out the window, and I said, "Oh, that's the Pacific Ocean." And just the look on her face is something I have never forgotten, because it was just so amazing. I like to imagine that she, like I think I said that the bus plates were from Kansas, and I like to think that she had never been to California, never been to Oregon or Washington, and came out here, and for the first time ever was seeing the ocean. And I think she was in her 70s or 80s. I'm pretty terrible at judging age, but she was pretty elderly, and I always remember the look on her face, because it was just so. It was amazement. It was awe. It was like, oh my God, I am seeing the Pacific Ocean, and yeah. So I totally get it if I say, hey, I'm in the ocean, but at the same time, so you kind of know this. I don't know. Could kind of make it wrestling related. When you live in LA, but so you know that from where I am, I'm 6 hours away. 6+, actually, I'm about 7 hours from Rosita. So when I get a lot of people asking me, "Oh, hey, how come you don't go to PWG shows more often?" I go, "It's 7 hours one way, man. I don't have the time or the money to do that, because I'll get off work at 5 on a Friday. I'm not about to go all the way down. I would never make it, for one.
Right.
And then, of course, the obvious answer is, well, then why don't you ask for the time off? Like, that's not necessarily how my job works.
Right. I mean,
So,
the shows are crazy though, because we get people who come from like Boston, and
I know. Yeah,
they come
kinda great.
regularly. There's one guy, I think people have taken to kind of calling him the sleeping guy. You'll see him on the PWG DVDs in the front row asleep. But people don't know, like, you'll see him on the NXT shows in Full Sail as well, because he actually lives in Florida, and he's at almost every PWG show. So,
Yeah, totally. I'm
yeah.
envious of these people that can do that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know at this point. I've kind of stopped going to the PWG shows, but I mean, I guess that's another question. Do you go to any indie wrestling shows very regularly? I mean, on my show,
Regularly, no. Unfortunately, there's Supreme Pro Wrestling out here who run shows regularly. I'm actually going to go to their show for the first time for their 18th anniversary show.
hey, they're one of the original homes of Timothy Thatcher, man. I mean, you should have been going for a while.
I used to watch him when he was part of the Sacramento Wrestling Federation.
Okay.
So I would see him there. And also APW, I would go to their shows sporadically. But for me, it's honestly, it's time constraints. There's just not enough time. And as weird as it sounds, given how much I do in indie wrestling, going to indie wrestling shows is not always the most appealing thing for me to do, because I already spent so much time watching other indie wrestling that to then go see it live. And so this is how it would go. I am one of my only friends who watches wrestling is a guy I grew up with. We've known each other since he was 6 and I was 5. I have no other friends who are even remotely interested in going with me. So at that point, it's like, oh, well, I'm going to go to a wrestling show by myself, or I can go out drinking with, other people. So
Yeah, I mean, it does. And
like I said, since I don't watch all the WWE, people probably go, oh, well, you don't watch that much wrestling. So you got to add up. I watch like AAW, PWG, New Japan, Ring of Honor, CWF Mid-Atlantic regularly. And that does not leave a lot. And then other promotions as well, such as, Southern Underground Pro right now I'm getting into, Nova Pro I'm getting into, AIW I'll watch shows when someone recommends it to me. Even CZW shows I'll watch when it's recommended. So I watch a lot of wrestling.
Right.
So the idea of going to a live show by myself, it's not the most appealing thing in the world.
Got to get you more into the UK and Australian scene, though. That's the next step, I think, here.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. People are like, oh, you should go to a live progress show. You should go down to New Zealand. It's like, okay, sure. I'll totally watch that.
Right. Well, I guess, let me see. So did you go, like, to school in state? Did you, like, have you lived any time outside of California for a prolonged period of time at all?
I lived in France.
Okay.
For about 9 months.
Oh, okay. What was that? What were you doing there?
Let's just say that was me finding myself.
Nice. So you were on your Benjamin Franklin shit.
Yeah. You could kind of say that.
Yeah, maybe not as much syphilis as old Benny Frank's got, but still having some fun.
Definitely not powdered wig level.
Yes.
But yeah, no, that was just me kind of getting away and kind of going, okay, I'm gonna go outside of the United States for a little while, and there had nothing to do with anything political or anything like that. It was just, I just kind of want to get away and not be around my bubble, my sphere. And while I love California, and I also, my sister went to school in New York, so I loved going there. I just kind of wanted to be away.
It had to give you some frame of reference, I would assume, right? I mean, kind of seeing another culture, being immersed in another culture completely.
Oh yeah, no, it absolutely did. It gave me this is going to sound pretty prototypical, but it gave me a certain understanding and a different point of reference for how I live my life, and so I've come back to it, and it has affected my life greatly. It's one of those. I don't want to say it was a huge cathartic moment, but yeah, it provided a lot of different ways for me to how I view the world and people. And luckily, I did it when I was pretty young.
Yeah, so the next thing I was going to ask. What was the time frame? Where were you at in life when you decided to go out there?
I was 19.
19? Oh, okay. So you were just kind of finishing up high school and took some time.
So I guess to give some context to that, yeah, no, I finished high school when I was 16.
Oh, nice.
And I had been in, I was taking college level courses pretty young. So anyone that doesn't know this, if you can guess from my last name, if you know my real last name, I'm Chinese. So I had the typical tiger mom who put me into college level courses when I was 13. So by the time I was 18, I was burnt out on school. Right. I was a few credits away from an AA. Or actually an AS technically. And I was just burnt out of school. I just wanted to go out. Not go out like a party, but I just wanted to leave. So I actually just recently finished my bachelor's degree and applied for law school in December because I did not want to deal with school after having dealt with it for so long. So yeah, going away was kind of my thing, and that like I think I mentioned to you earlier, I lived in Hermosa Beach for a little while, so that was also during the same time period.
Was that before or after you went to France? After. Okay, so you came back to the States, and did you go directly to Hermosa Beach, or did you stop anywhere else?
No, I kind of went directly. I flew into LAX and met up with a couple friends there, and they let me stay with them. So
nice.
Went okay.
Nice. And were you just kind of floating around, or were you doing like?
Oh yeah, I was definitely floating around. I was basically couch surfing.
Okay, well that's I don't know, like I don't know what is it. It's like Kerouac, right? It's you kind of had to have that time, even if you're.
I definitely did. I worked at a Century Theater. I then made the great career choice after Cinemark bought Century because they wanted to push me back down. So I got to salary at Century, and then they wanted to push me back down to hourly because they wanted to bring in their own managers who they had trained. And even though I was already rightfully below assistant general manager, they were like, well, you're not one of ours, so we're going to push you back down to hourly rate. And I went, it's not going to happen. So I made the great decision to go to Blockbuster. So, and we all know how that turned out.
Yeah, perfect timing. What was this? This was like early 2000s going to Blockbuster? Or?
Yeah, it was 2000 and, oh, God. Maybe, 6 or 7?
Okay, so either way, it was like within 5 years of the company going out of business.
Oh, yeah, no. I was there when our new CEO came in, and he was the CFO for 7-Eleven, and the changes he made to Blockbuster were ridiculous. We started selling books and sandwiches, and went, oh my God, you're running this like a 7-Eleven. When at that point, it was killing us. We had the online deals, and we could have been Netflix before Netflix, but he didn't think that was, for whatever reason. And you read the business cases on it afterwards. So hindsight being 2020, completely ridiculous. But even then, as employees, we knew this could have been a thing. And people will tell me this, and they go, look, Netflix, well, they didn't really know what they were doing. Yes, they did. 100%. When Netflix was started, it was never meant to be a DVD business. Look at the name, Netflix. It was always meant to be branded for the internet. They just knew that they had to grow their base first through DVDs. They were always going to go online. And it was kind of ridiculous that even though we had the contracts in there already, that Blockbuster didn't do it, or they didn't pull the trigger soon enough. And by the time they did, it was too late.
Yeah, because
by that time, the Redbox came in.
Yeah, so. I remember towards the end of Blockbuster, there was some kind of subscription service that they were offering that was very similar to what Netflix became, and I was like, oh, this is super cool, and it had that feeling where you're like, how are they making any money off of this? And obviously it bears out now that you see they would have been Netflix. That's how they would have made the money, is that they would have just gotten this kind of market permeation. Wow, that's
that's a big old lesson there. Everyone listening going, oh wow, God, this guy's old.
Yeah, well, no, I mean,
Blockbuster.
You're not that. I would assume you're not that old. I mean, Blockbuster when you're in your.
I always like to
20s.
Joke around that. I was at Blockbuster in my 20s.
Right, but what were you saying? You were joking around about.
I always like to joke around to say that I am the oldest person in the room, because even though, especially nowadays, I am not. I have a lot of life experience.
Right.
So.
And I mean,
some but not so great.
I definitely relate to that. I've always been the youngest person where I work, but always felt like the oldest person there. Just based on my personality and like you say, life experience and responsibility level and all that stuff. So I totally relate to that. And, you talked about graduating early and taking college level courses when you were young. I did the same thing. And I didn't, take 9 months to go to France, but I had my kind of dalliances where I decided I was done with all this because I was burnt out from feeling like I missed my childhood from working so hard from so young, which I feel like is probably the same way you were feeling when you decided that you were going to take a little, I guess, lost weekend.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, which, hey, I mean, sounded like you earned it. Sounds like it was definitely a good time. Now, when you were at Blockbuster, you didn't work your way up the corporate ladder like you did at the Regent Theaters, did you?
I actually was in training to run 2 different stores. So I got to assistant general manager there as well. And yeah, it didn't work out.
And then it's hitting the fan. See, it's just, that's the problem with being, I don't know, that personality. Even when you
like we're talking years. I was at Century for 2 years, and I was at Blockbuster for 3, I think. Right. I was coming up on 3 when it was gonna and you could tell it was gonna go under, and it was like, okay, well, we need to leave. And by that time, luckily, I was with the person who became my, at the time, fiance, and so it was time to move. So we made the move to Sacramento. And
and was that still Hermosa Beach?
No, she was actually originally from Sacramento, which ironically is why we moved back up here. But yeah, that's a whole different story for another time.
Yeah, we might have to do another episode because we're pretty much running out of time here. But before we go, I have to ask you the final question, and I completely blew through the middle question, but we'll maybe save that for later too. So before we go, I got to ask you the final question here, Chris, and it's pretty simple. I think you may have already hit some stuff that would have qualified to answer this question, but unfortunately now it's off the table. So if there was someone who only knows you from the podcast, or maybe some of the stuff that you write on the website, they don't know you too deep personally, what would be something that they'd be shocked to find out about you?
Yeah, I would think that it would be that I am incredibly politically incorrect.
Okay,
I think
yeah.
so. If you've listened to the show for a while, you know that I try to toe that line on there, even though it is technically my podcast. And it's because that's how I am in life. Like, heck, even on this podcast, you could probably kind of tell, like, hey, that's just my natural personality when doing things that I know are for public consumption. But if you're one of my close friends, you will hear I make jokes, I make comments that are wholly just really, really crass and wholly, like, these are not things that people would say probably if they were in any public space, but I will do it. I have two friends. We hang out at this Beach Hut Deli, and there are times when we get pretty rowdy, and to the point that the owner, who luckily is a friend of ours, will just say, "Hey guys, I know you, but my customers don't know you, so keep that down." So yeah, that's one of those things.
All right. Well, I mean, that definitely is surprising to me because, yes, you come across very professional, very straight-laced, and very respectable. So, I mean, not to say that it's not respectable to make some off-color comments, and people who followed me long enough know that I have made my fair share of off-color jokes here and there. So maybe that's what we'll do when we do the Secret After Dark, like you're talking about, the banter.
Yes, the unfiltered.
Yeah, we'll do the Chris GST Unfiltered podcast, see how that goes.
All 5 listeners you'll get from that.
Well, all right, Chris, this was a lot of fun. I feel like we barely scratched the surface here, but we'll definitely have to have you back, I think. Maybe get a co-host or another person on here and really get into some stuff. But I guess...
I apologize for being so long-winded. That's just me, too.
Oh, no, I love it, man. It makes my job easier to have someone who's willing to talk. It's not as fun when you get people who aren't going to give you some answers, some actual answers, So thank you so much. Is there anything you need to plug for the people? I mean, it's always weird to ask that on this show because essentially this podcast is like an hour-long plug because we essentially talk about your work the whole time, or for a good part of it, but give out the web addresses and all that stuff so that people can go and follow you and stuff like that.
So I'll actually plug this, and this will hopefully come off well. So PW Ponderings, we are doing a fundraiser for RAIN. The organization, we did a fundraiser for them 3 years ago, and it being coming up in the month of March, we really felt that there's been a huge conversation when it comes to the Me Too and Time's Up movement, particularly when it comes to the wrestling industry. So we are restarting the fundraiser, and it happened throughout all of March. And if you can go to pwponderings.com, find out the details there. Follow us on Twitter at pwponderings as well. And essentially what we're doing is the same thing that we have always done, which is depending on how much is raised, we will do marathon podcasts with special guests. Last year we raised a little over $1,200, so that meant 10 hours of content. I believe this year we're doing more. It's actually more. It's more a project for Jerome, who will sporadically come back and do stuff with the website. So yeah, I hope everyone will come and donate to RAIN. I mean, it's a great organization. If you don't know about it, it's the organization that Mick Foley is heavily associated with. You can go to rainn.org, find out more about them, and please contribute to them in any way. It's very helpful. And so this is one of the many ways that we like to use the platform that people have graciously come to find results or listen to us. And so yeah, that's what I'll plug.
That's fantastic. And when you first said you're doing a fundraiser for Rain, I was like, the K-pop singer, why does he need help? But no, the
I know,
charity-
right? Why? He doesn't need it.
He's fine. He's doing really well. No, but yeah, Rain is a great cause, like you said, and obviously you get something cool out of it from you guys offering to do that. So yeah, I would recommend everybody listening to go check that out. Yeah, otherwise, I guess that'll be it from here.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on the show, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on, and good night, everybody.